Hi, I'm Bill, the Domestic Monk. Welcome back to another video and thanks very much for watching. So I am very excited about the opportunity to speak with Brian Hoyland about something we all wrestle with, the pursuit of holiness in this life and what awaits us in the next. There are few people better qualified to have this conversation with than Brian, because his life combines the suffering of Job with the resurrection of Lazarus. I reference the life of Job because Brian, who due to circumstances outside of his control while serving his country as a United States Army military police officer, was afflicted with a debilitating medical condition that produced years of physical and emotional suffering in his life. And in 2017 culminated in his near-death experience, which is the Lazarus component of Brian's story. While clinically dead for 10 minutes, Brian experienced the presence of God and had a personal encounter with our Lord Jesus Christ that changed his life, as you might well imagine. On top of that, he was instructed by Jesus himself on the 3 things he needed to do to live his life the way Jesus expects all of us to live our lives. Because Brian's story is so amazing, it wouldn't do it justice to try and tell it in a short 1-hour interview. With Brian's gracious consent and cooperation, I'm going to present this interview in 3 segments. The first segment will focus on the Job aspect of Brian's story, his life prior to the near-death experience in 2017. The second segment will focus on the near-death experience itself and his return to life, the Lazarus component of the story. The third and final segment will consist of a question and answer session with Brian, where he will share with us the lessons he learned during and after his ordeal, and how his Catholic faith supported him before, during, and after these experiences. I hope you enjoy this conversation and Brian's story as much as I did. So without further ado, let's get started. So Brian, thank you very much for taking the time to interview with me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm so happy to be talking with you.
Thank you very much. Before we start, can you just give us a little background on your life, how you were raised, your religious formation, just kind of an overview of what happened leading up to your incident?
Yeah, I was raised as a Protestant, kind of more of a non-denominational Baptist type of a tinge to it. I had a grandfather who, on my dad's side, they left the Catholic Church. Well, my parents were pretty young at the time. I'm not sure exactly what age, but my grandfather then became an Assemblies of God minister. And, anybody who knows that particular faith, they really don't particularly like Catholics. So I had my other side, my mom's side, they remained Catholic, but they didn't, try to convert me or anything like that. So they respected my parents' wishes to not keep me as a Catholic. But I was actually baptized Catholic. And then 3 weeks after I was born, my parents left the Catholic Church. So this was, they did the baptism, I'm not sure, like a week after I was born, but they did that to satisfy family, and then they just left the church and made it official. But so raising me that way, I remember the Protestant side, they were very much willing to tell me their beliefs about the church most often. So I heard a lot of all the stereotypical things about the Catholic faith. They believe this, they believe that. Only later on when I became Catholic did I find out that's not what Catholics believe. It's just what people believe Catholics believe. So it was just a surreal thing. But I remember growing up and just having a love for Jesus. I did have that, and both sides really did encourage that. So I had this love for Jesus, but I know, looking at my life, I didn't really know who he was. There's a lot of talk as a Protestant. I remember hearing, gotta have a personal relationship with Jesus, but you had to understand that by yourself. You had to come to terms with that. There's nobody to teach you really who Jesus is and how he lived and what he stood for. It's each individual had their own interpretation of that, and so I drifted away from the faith. I remember as a teenager, I would ask a lot of questions that were really hard for I got accepted into the adult Bible study when I was probably I think 13.
Wow.
You know, and you're a teenager, early teenager. You like to ask a lot of questions that I particularly liked kind of poking the bear a little bit. So I would ask questions, but things I was genuinely concerned about and curious, but were not received very well. They ended up becoming things that I found the answers to in the Catholic faith, but they were definitely challenges in the faith that I was raised in. So they asked me, asked my parents. They didn't ask me, but they asked my parents to, not bring me back because I was just asking too many questions and I was disrupting the group apparently. So my parents left the church. My dad was a deacon, so he was, high up there. They really respected him, but he lost all respect for that church because he was in the group with me, and he's like, he's just curious. He wants to have some answers, and how could you not, answer it? So, but that kind of let me think, well, why would I need to go there if they can't answer my questions? And I just tried to tell myself I was going to learn about my faith on my own. And my parents didn't make me go to church again. So I went into the military right out of high school. I signed up before I was even 18, so I was ready to. Yeah, I knew I was going to be a soldier my whole life. I really looked up to all my uncles and family members who were service members, and I love soldiers. I've always had just an admiration for them, and so I wanted to do that myself. I joined up right away, joined the military police, and that was a great time. But for a guy who's struggling with his faith, and trying to become who he feels like he is, it opened up a lot of doors that weren't necessarily very moral. I was a very moral person, but there's a lot that's open to soldiers. And I remember though going into basic. Even it's funny how God sews these little golden threads in your life that. He pulls them once in a while and it pulls you tight right back to him. But he gives you a little bit of leeway until he pulls it tight again, but those threads are still there. They're still sewn in. I remember I didn't want to pick a faith. I was really resolute about this. I didn't want to pick a faith for my dog tag. I wanted it to be, just nothing there. I didn't want an atheist or agnostic because first off, I didn't at that time really understand what they were. I knew an atheist. I didn't believe that. I thought that's ridiculous. I just didn't know what to believe about God. I just didn't want anything on there. And my drill sergeant was not happy with that. He's like, no, you have to put something on there. And so he's pressuring me, and I wanted nothing to do with the faith that I was raised in. And he's like, well, who else in your family has a religion? I said, well, my grandpa, who I really loved a lot, he was like my favorite grandpa, right? He was Catholic, and I remember seeing him go to Mass every day. He'd get up early in the morning, he'd go to Mass, he'd come back, but he was just such a humble guy. I really looked up to him because just that humility, it was something completely different than what I had. I'm a very cocky kind of, very self-assured, and but yet there was something about him that always drew me to him. And I said, well, my grandpa, he's Catholic. He's okay, that's it. You're going to be Catholic. And so he made me put Catholic on my dog tag, so I still have that on there. And
That's
isn't that great? Because I think about being baptized. What a fortunate thing for me to have had that happen.
yeah.
And parents then to leave. But then this other thread just ties me in with that on my dog tag. So if I would have died in combat, I would have been able to have proper burial.
Yeah.
I would have been identified with the faith that I now hold very dear.
Isn't it too, because you were baptized Catholic, so you were Catholic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your drill sergeant to point that out. That's funny.
Isn't it great? I mean, it's so funny how, and it was lost on me at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a young man. I didn't think anything of it. I just begrudgingly did it. But that had to be from God to tell me, look, you're still mine. You still belong belonged to me. And, you know, because those things remained with me. I never took my mind off that. I always thought, why did that happen? I respected my drill sergeant, but I wasn't afraid to tell him no, I didn't want it.
Yeah.
But it was something so convincing in his argument that I said, okay, that makes sense. Let's do it. You know, and it was amazing because there was something that God used that drill sergeant to speak to me, and I remember it for the rest of my life.
Exactly. That's remarkable. It really is. So,
Yeah.
There, you were in the service for 4 years?
Yeah. Yep. And while I was in, that's where this whole additional story, it began. I didn't realize the severity of it. I ended up getting a military medical retirement. And you're a young guy still at the time, so I think I was like 22 when I got out of the military.
Wow.
And so my whole career, my whole dreams are all, uprooted. And I go to the VA for this checkup and, to establish my care and the follow-up from when I got out of the military. But I was given the anthrax vaccine when I was in. And this vaccine was a 4 or 5 shot series. And I remember we got a little white pill. It was called progestamine bromide along with the vaccine. And that was like a 30-day supply. It had us take that. But the vaccine itself, they never had a shot record for it. So when we get all of it, you know how it is when you get deployed, you get this big record, and they stamp all the shots you get, and they give you a terrible amount of shots. I mean, it's unbelievable. But this one, they weren't putting a stamp on it. At first, I thought I must have missed it. I just, kind of heading this, spinning around from all the different things we had to do. But then go through for the second time, and I'm like, where's the record for this? Long story short, about the third or fourth time, I refused to take it. I said, I'm not going to take it. You guys said there was going to be a stamp, but there isn't one. Again, I'm not comfortable taking this shot. And they came up to me, and the captain who was in charge of the nurses there, that were the medical team or whatever, he told me, Private, take your shot and move out. Now I just got out of basic training. I was only a month or two out of basic training, and you follow orders. You're so used to that, just doing what I was told. I was like, well, I better not, really mess up my career right now, So I took it, but then the next time I realized my sergeants weren't taking it, and I talked to them about it, and I said, I really don't feel comfortable taking this. And they're like, we're not taking it. And so there was a number of them who didn't. They told me, because I still didn't feel comfortable. I also thought I was invincible. I'm like, if something bad happens, they're experimenting on us. I didn't think it was going to be as bad as what it ends up turning out to be. But I thought, well, I'm young and strong. I'll be able to overcome whatever they're experimenting on me, and it's probably going to help somebody in the future. I told myself a lot of things about it. But I did follow their directions. They said, make a copy of all your records from now on. Whenever you go, just every once in a while, go to the hospital and make records and send them home to your parents. Or make copies of them. So I did that, which ended up being very much into my favor, and I'll get to that part. But I ended up having symptoms probably a month, or even maybe, I don't know if it was less than a month, but about a month after the series started taking into effect, I started having symptoms. My arms would go numb. My legs would go numb. So as an MP, I'm driving around in a patrol vehicle, and I'm just all of a sudden getting so numb that I had to pull over quite often.
Wow.
And I was just complete lack of circulation for periods of time. And so I ended up, I was a very, very physically active guy. I was on the Army boxing team. I mean, I made the team right out of basic training. So I mean, I was very good at those kinds of sports. But I had maxed my PT test while I was in basic training. And you being a veteran, they don't like to do that. It's very difficult to max your PT test in basic training. And so I had a lot of physical fitness, high level of it, and to have this experience happen, it was really drastic. I could see that there was something wrong, and I knew it had the only variable that was at place was this vaccine. But military wasn't so forthcoming on this. And anyway, they ended up taking me after a PT test. I just ran my heart out. It was cold, and I was in Germany at the time, and it was cold, and I ran this super fast 2-mile run. I mean, it was really fast, but my arms and my legs went completely numb on me.
Wow.
And when I got to the end of this, I was so cold that I started to pass out, and I lost consciousness. I don't know how much I was responding, but there was enough of a concern that my team or my unit brought me to the hospital emergency room, and they brought me back. I recovered fine, but the doctors put me on a heart medication. And they didn't ever explain why I was on this heart medication. They didn't tell my unit that it was a medication for my heart. They just said that they need to put me on this medication to help with my circulatory system. So I was about a month after being on this medication. They couldn't wake me up for I can't remember exactly now what it was that was going on, but there was some sort of emergency. They had to wake up everybody in the unit. So all the guys in the barracks, they were trying to get us to wake up, and everybody else was up but me. And I'm an early riser, so I never had this problem of getting up. So they were really concerned about this, brought me back to the emergency room, and they found out that it was heart medication, and that's one of the side effects, is that sometimes your heart rate, particularly for elite athletes, can go very low. My heart rate had fallen, my beats per minute were about 30 beats per minute.
Holy smokes.
Well, normally I was walking around probably about 45 beats per minute. I had a really low heart rate. I mean, it was just, I was in very good shape. So this was just too low for me. So they ended up getting me off that, but we never did get an answer for why I was put on a heart medication at 18 years old.
Now, were the other people in your unit, did anybody else experience any of this stuff? Or
Yeah, there's been a lot of guys who have had different things. We've had guys who have died from different autoimmune diseases. But the thing that gets really interesting about that is, particularly with me being right out of basic training, how it is. You going through MEPS, I mean, you get the most thorough medical evaluation that you're ever going to get in your entire life. And they give you a clean bill of health or they don't let you in. And so, I mean, I was completely clean of bill of health, and then all of a sudden now I have this severe reaction. There's only one thing that it could be. Army food wasn't that bad, so I mean, it's. I liked it too. I thought it was always good. They always fed me well. But so after this though, a couple months after I started having those symptoms, and other guys started having some symptoms, they shut our unit down. Now this was a historic military police unit, and they ended up deactivating our unit, and a couple years later they reactivated it, but that's a whole different part of the story. But the fact that they deactivated it was really interesting because they sent us all to different units. So everybody in that unit, they sent us all over the rest of the world to totally different places, really to break down the communication, I think. Just
wow.
Something had happened that they wanted to deal, kind of keep from getting exposed, which they did eventually admit later on. But they, it was very weird to be part of that, to not really have a whole lot of military experience, but hearing from your sergeants who have seen things, and it was definitely not protocol for the way that things were happening, but it was something that people had seen on rare occasions in different units. So yeah, that just led to a total degradation of my health. I stayed in though for the 4 years, and it got to a point where it was so bad that it ended up being diagnosed with circulatory and neurological damage. And at one point they tried to say that it was because of coming in contact with other chemical agents that were in the air. The Army chemical alarms that they give you, small particles of dust, from the sand will cause those things to go off. So just because they go off doesn't mean you come in contact with it. But we never had any experiences other than those alarms going off and having to put on our chemical suits. But there was nothing that that they ever were able to prove caused that to happen. So we get to about 4 years into it, and now it was so bad that I was going to test for special forces, and I really wanted to go into special forces. And I blew away the PT test, but during the medical evaluation, this stuff surfaced, and they looked into why I was on heart medication. They were looking into some of the symptoms that I had. They started doing more tests. They found that those symptoms hadn't resolved and had actually gotten worse. All this time I was trying to keep it to myself, because you can get like a red flag where they deny you to have any classes, any extra training. They give you the worst duties in the unit. So nobody wants that. And so it all came out that I had some pretty severe neurological and circulatory damage. And so at this point they asked me, well, we're gonna have you either finish out your tour, and which was just another year, or we're gonna give you a medical retirement right now, and you can get out a year early. And I said, well, there's no sense sitting behind a desk, because that's what they were going to give me. It was the worst possible job in the military police. And so I said, I'll just get out early and try to get on with my life and see what I can do. And so I did that, and then after I got out, I went back to school. I started working too. I ended up meeting my wife and raising a family, and all the while continuing to add to my education until I was able to become a psychotherapist. And so, it's interesting to see how you start out one way of wanting to, just because I wanted to be a soldier didn't mean I wanted to just go around and kill everybody. I wanted to help people, but in a way that I was physically able to. Not everybody is able to stop the bad guy.
Yeah.
I happen to have that ability. So I really wanted to do that, but now I was sitting at a point where I wasn't able to really physically do that any longer. But I realized, I can help people with my mind. I can help talk people through things, because I don't get shook very easily on things. Even the fact that I had to lose my whole career, it was draining. It hurt more than anything I could ever think of, at that age. But I was resilient. I was able to come back and find the plan B and, plan C, and how many other ones had to come along the way. But I really found that, becoming a psychotherapist offered me the opportunity to help people who are experiencing a trauma like my physical one, but in their head, and in the way that their emotions are being activated, that are sometimes beyond their control. And I thought, this is a battle I can be part of. I can get in there with somebody, and I can help carry that load. And so I found that really rewarding, and that was where I decided to go. As I was going to school, I still used some of my physical abilities. Being a father, and going to school full time, I decided, what better job than being a bouncer? I have a resume for it, so that was an interesting part of my life, but it worked out, because you can go to school all day and study in the...
much in common, it's not even funny.
Yeah, you did that as well, huh?
Yeah. After I got out of the Army, when I moved to California, I was all into bodybuilding, and I moved out to Southern California, and I ended up falling into bouncing before I got hired. It was a great job.
Yeah, because they look for guys who are cool under pressure and who know how to handle themselves, but aren't so quick to, there's a lot of guys who think they're real tough, but they get pushed into it, and it becomes a fight when it doesn't need to be.
Yeah, they start things they don't need to start.
That's right. And there's something about MPs that we're able, you got a drill sergeant, one on each side yelling at you, and then one in the middle threatening to do whatever, it's like, you learn how to handle your emotions and not, just keep that poker face on and see through to what you need to do, and it's an invaluable lesson that I think a lot of people probably could use the benefit from.
So it's incredible. So I read your book, which is an amazing book, and it doesn't even scratch the surface. you've given more information that's not even in the book here. It's incredible. And that's what I meant when I started this introduction. I mean, you really have, you know, you're really a modern day Job. I mean, this is something, you're just a guy trying to do the right thing. You want to serve your country, you want to be in law enforcement, and, you're exposed to this stuff, and you're dealing at a young age. I cannot imagine. I mean, it's not like you lived a life of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and we're out partying every night, doing cocaine, all this stuff, and then all of a sudden your body breaks down. I mean, you're just doing, what you're asked to do in the performance of your duty, and here you go at a young age, and you end up getting married, you start a family, you're at work, and then things really break down from there, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's so fast forward several years, a couple decades. I think I was probably 40 when this happened, somewhere around the 40, 41, somewhere. But in really good health still. Amazingly, I ran marathons. I fought mixed martial arts. I mean, I was doing all these things with severe handicaps. I knew that there was a deficit because I didn't have the same vigor that I had, growing up. And, granted, my doctor, he always said, well, you're getting older. And I'm like, I'm 30 years old. I'm not getting older. I'm at my prime. But there was already a decline that was happening in certain respects. But like I said, I still was running marathons. One day I just said, what haven't I done? I'm gonna go. There was some guy, I can't remember his name. Some guy who was in the Navy SEALs, I think, or something. But I read this article about him that he said he wanted to do this like ultra marathon, one of these 100-mile things. And they asked him, well, how many marathons have you done? He hadn't done any.
Yeah.
And so I was like, that's my kind of guy. Just bring me the test that I want to do. I'm going to go test myself, and if I don't make it, I don't make it. But it's that idea that I just don't want to let fear be a limitation.
Yeah.
That's such an important part of my life. My core belief is I never wanted fear to be something that controlled me. I don't like that idea. And as I get into my story, I hope people really take that into account, because there's no way you can avoid fear when you face some of the things that I've ended up having to face. But there's a strength that comes from somewhere else, and I'll explain more of that. But I got into this marathon thing. I never ran more than, I think it was 11 miles, might have been 12 miles. Never a half marathon. No, so I think it was 11 miles though. I had never ran further than 11 miles, even in my training up to that first marathon.
Wow.
So, I had driven 26.4 miles or whatever it is, 2 miles, but I never had ran that far. And so, as I did this marathon, I think it took me 4 hours to do it, which isn't a terrible time, but I had never ran that far. So,
yeah.
But I felt like I had slowed my pace too much in the beginning, because I was really trying to, preserve my energy. And the only downside to not going those further miles was you get really bloody feet. It's like that. After having done more of them, it wasn't a problem after that.
Yeah.
That's because I was like, well, I'm going to make sure because there's a lot of things I didn't see coming. Your clothes wear on you in different areas of the body that just aren't usually getting rubbed by clothes, however many thousands of times that it happens. So
yeah.
There was a lot of just uncomfortable things. But, as I was doing it, I'm like, I'm going to finish this marathon. There's no way. I was watching people quitting, and, I was like, that's not going to be me. I'm going to keep on going. But I got stronger as I got towards the end. I'm like, I really kind of went out a little too slow. I should have pushed it a little bit further, but I was satisfied. And then it just kind of became a fun thing, just to do marathons. I was going all over the place, just doing these different marathons, and I had a good time with that. I didn't know that my heart at this time was being attacked by this autoimmune disease that I had developed from those vaccines that I had gotten.
Right.
And so, I it all came to a head. I was really sick for about the week after I had a physical. I had a physical, and then I did like a 5-mile run after that. And that was the worst 5 mile run I'd ever done. I did finish, but I was slow. I was out of breath. I didn't feel right, and I thought, I was probably just sick because I was sick that whole week following it. And then my wife was going out of town to like a girls' retreat with her cousins and stuff. So I was going to be at home with the kids. And I remember getting home from work, and I was so excited to have this weekend because when my wife was out for the weekend, there was less rules around the house. So me and the kids we'd stay up and just do fun stuff that I didn't get to always do with them. Because it's just kind of fun to have them alone and make it a special time. And so I was all excited, and I remember that night I was just so tired, and I didn't do much with them, and I thought, well, we'll just do it tomorrow. So we went to bed, and I woke up, and it was like having a gorilla stomping on my chest.
Wow.
And I had no clue that it was my heart that was bad. I've never experienced anything like that, but I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. I was projectile puking. I mean, just terrible pain that I was going through. So that was going on all night, and God bless my kids. They were so good. They were real little. I think they were 11, 9, and 6 or something like that, somewhere around there. And but one of my kids, the middle one, he was catching my projectile puke in a bucket for me.
Wow.
I know, it's like I love that, because what a sweet kid, because he knew that I wouldn't want it all over the floor, and he just didn't want me to get up out of bed. It's just beautiful kids, But anyway, so the next morning I still was feeling terrible. I wasn't puking anymore. I didn't have anything left, but I was still having all the other symptoms. But I was really getting bad to where the breathing was so hard, and I could feel my chest. It felt like it was just pounding against my ribs. And
Wow.
I thought, I got to get downstairs. Maybe if I get some fresh air, get out of this room that smells like puke, I could get down there and feel a little bit better. I couldn't even walk. I had to crawl down the stairs. So I get down the stairs, I crawl to the couch, I lay on the couch, and I thought, it's not going to get better. I started, not being able to see well, because I'm sure the lack of oxygen, rich blood getting to my system was causing this. I didn't realize that my heart wasn't pumping properly. So I knew that this was getting bad. Having seen enough people in certain medical states that I'm like, this is beyond. I don't want my kids to watch me die. I gotta get the ambulance out here. I did not want to. I didn't want to be that guy who calls and has indigestion or some other insignificant thing, And at 40 years old, I just didn't think that this was going to be my heart. After running all those marathons and I was physically fit, and so I finally had my daughter call, and they get out there quick. It was great. The police responded really quickly, and then the ambulance was right behind them. So when the ambulance came in, they started taking my vitals, and then all of a sudden they cut my shirt off. They were warming up the paddles, and I'm like, what are you guys putting the paddles on me for? This can't be my heart. And they're like, oh yeah, your heart is going over 300 beats per minute.
Wow.
And they were afraid that I was going to have sudden cardiac death. So I was really surprised. I mean, it was like just a shock to me that was happening. They gave me the shock, and as much as I hate shocks, that shock actually felt really good, because it took my heart down. It made it feel a lot better. It was still really high, but it was now at a more manageable pace that they thought they could transport me to the hospital. So they put me on the stretcher, and as they're wheeling me out, the last thing I remember seeing were my 3 kids standing by the door, and the face that they had just looked like they were looking at a dead man as their father, and it was just heart-wrenching. And then everything went black for me. I don't remember anything else. I do know that the doctors got my name, my phone number, my wife's phone number, so I was clearly conscious. I just don't remember any of it. At some point they had to intubate me before my wife even got there, so they had talked to her on the phone. and then they called her back and told her when she was coming back from up north that yeah, we had to intubate him. You better hurry and get here. He's not going to last much longer. So she was able to make arrangements, have a friend of hers come over and pick the kids up and take them to her house. She came right to the hospital. And, I was intubated, I think, so that was a Saturday that I went to the hospital and intubated sometime in the afternoon there. And then I don't remember full details of Sunday. I do know I woke up once and they kind of put me back to sleep, I think. Or I just went back to sleep. But I was trying to communicate with them. And that I remember very fuzzy that they were shocked that I came out of this state that I was in. But later on, my wife told me more about that. They were shocked. They thought I was going to die. They did not think I would ever come out of it. And if I did, they thought I'd be a vegetable. And when I first came out of it, as far as I remember, I couldn't communicate. I barely can remember thinking properly. So, they might have even taken that and thought, hey, he's still going to be a vegetable, because they thought, they told her during that Sunday that, if he comes out of this, he's going to be in the hospital for the rest of his short life.
Wow.
And so, this was a massive effect, because they couldn't even get my vitals properly when I was intubated, because it was just, my heart rate was just so off. And, but it was this load that was been put on my heart. It was dying. And so I come out of it, though, later that evening. And the part that I remember was later in the evening. And I wanted that tube out of my mouth. I couldn't stand it. It was terrible. It was one of the most uncomfortable things. But it was because, I couldn't communicate. You got this thing in your mouth, and and it's hard to talk, but it's hard to think properly either. And so I'm trying to write, I don't want to say this part because in case my mom watches this, but my mom was asking me a lot of questions. She was really concerned. She was really upset.
I remember that from your book, yeah.
Yeah, she heard my dad drove from Georgia, so they drove straight through, and they were genuinely upset. But my mom's asking a lot of questions and things I clearly had no clue about because I was unconscious this whole time. So it was really frustrating me.
One question about that, Brian. So when you were going through this experience, you were unconscious. It's just like a normal situation in life. Like you're asleep, you don't know what's going on. Then you just wake up and you're in and out. Like all of us when we're sick or we go to a surgery or something like that, right?
Yep, it was just like any other surgery. There was no dreams even. It was just blackness. I don't remember even from when I was conscious, from when I left the house. I don't even remember any of that. Wow. So, I mean, it was just lost time to me. I was actually surprised when I found out it was Sunday evening. I'm like, hey, you got to call my work and tell them I'm not going to probably make it in tomorrow. I just didn't. I mean, it was just such a shock to me that I was even in the hospital. I really couldn't believe it. But yeah, so they finally got the tube out, but it all that week they kept saying he's never going to get out of the hospital, and then I just said, well, what do I have to do to get out of the hospital? What steps do I need to be able to show you that I'm able to complete? And they said, well, you got to be able to have your heart rate like this, and you got to be able to do this, and this test has to come back, and one after the other kept coming back in. My mind cleared up like really quickly.
Wow.
And so I definitely wasn't going to be the vegetable that they thought I was going to be. By the end of that week, I was out. I was out of the hospital.
That's incredible.
It really was, especially because I might have pushed it a little bit further, but insurance companies don't really like to pay for that kind of stuff anyway.
Yeah.
But I've never been so weak in my entire life. But I just didn't want to be in the hospital any longer. I thought, this is where people die. I just want to get out of here. I want to go home, be comfortable.
At that point, where were you at faith-wise? Like this is a several-day experience, major traumatic, out of the blue, and it's serious, right? When the paramedics are pulling the paddles and the doctor So what was your spiritually, how are you handling that at the time?
Well, that first one, you know, I had already converted to being a Catholic. So, but I don't want to sound insulting to anybody. But I just, I look back on it and I kind of think I was a lukewarm Catholic. I really loved the faith, but I'd go to mass, I'd go to confession. I didn't go as often as I could, to either one. To be honest with you, I prayed my rosary every day, but that was more of because I made a deal when I first became a Catholic that I've just fell in love with the rosary, and for whatever reason, God gave me this grace, like just this beautiful experience with being able to pray so many rosaries and not being exhausted. I was praying them in my sleep.
Wow.
And I was really able to meditate on the mysteries, how beautiful that they are of Jesus' life. And I just remember just having this love for it. And so I had read this book. It was St. Louis de Montfort's, I think it's The Mysteries of the Rosary. But it said in there that anybody who prays her rosary, she'll be there for them at the end of their life.
Yeah.
And it really hit me. What's that?
I'm counting on that.
Yeah, it's exactly how I felt when I read that. I was like, I believe this. I knew that it was like God was shouting into my soul, saying, "Hey, I'm backing that up. That's definitely going to happen if you do this." And so I just made a deal that I was going to pray the rosary every day. But I'm not going to. I was lukewarm because I would take things for granted with it. Sometimes, I just I could have gone to confession so many more times and really experienced God's grace and forgiveness through confession. And having been a psychotherapist, I saw, as I would be waiting outside of confessionals, work done in 3 minutes that I couldn't do in years.
Yeah.
And it's always amazed me to see the anxiety, the tension, just the worry that people have going into confession as those sins are weighing upon them. And then when they come out, that relief. There's nothing like it. And to me, I knew this both psychologically and spiritually, and I still neglected it because I thought, wow, I'm going to live forever. It's not, I'll deal with this stuff, and I got all these other things. I just kept putting things off, and that's why I say lukewarm, is that I didn't put God first. I always would say that I put God first. I think often a lot of us do that.
Yeah.
But I really wasn't willing to sacrifice everything for Him. And when you learn to do that, I think you find He gives you so much more back. It's like we try to hold on and control things from our own perspective, and really all we're doing is getting in His way. He's going to do so much more for us if we just learn to trust in Him. But yeah, so I was lukewarm. And that was a detriment because as I'm facing this thing, I'm trying to pray to Him, but I also felt susceptible to the doctors. They were saying, well, you're so physically fit that that's why you made it through this. It's unbelievable that you did. Nobody can go through this, because the statistics for somebody to have that serious of a heart issue as I had, particularly when you look back on it, it's even more drastic. But with what they had at the time, people just don't live through it.
Wow.
And so but they were chalking it up to somehow I had control of this, and I wanted to believe that. But at the same time, I also knew I couldn't keep myself awake. I couldn't keep myself off that tube that they shoved down my throat. I had no control over what happened. And I started to really come to terms with, I got to get right with God. There's something that I'm giving a lot of lip service, but I'm not really living my life for Him. And so the next few months, I was in and out of the hospital regularly. I mean, it was like I came on first name basis with a lot of these people that were working there. But at first the doctors, they put in a defibrillator, and they said, we don't expect you to ever need this again. Everything's looking fine right now with what we see with your heart.
That turned out to be too.
Yes, that was a terror. It was like, imagine being hooked up to a torture device that can just do whatever it wants, whenever it wants, and it was unbelievable. I kept getting shocked, and, and I got this weakened body now, and this heart that they didn't realize how bad my heart was, because they didn't have the ability to look inside my heart, but my heart was completely devastated. I'll send you the pictures so you can, use them as you want for the video.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is an eye opener to see how bad my heart was at this time, and but this thing was it was terrible. I hated that thing, and I'm so glad it's out. But
Can I
you got a question?
a question on that? So this is what I mean about a guy who's just trying to do the right thing. Kind of the Job story that I'm trying to get across here that you dealt with. I mean, they put this pacemaker in, and it was experimental, right? And it be defective, and you started getting it would get an improper reading, and it would be so violent it would drive your knees up to your chest.
Yes. That was the first time it did it. I was sleeping, and I remember it was like one of the first good nights of sleep I've had in a while, and it happened, I think, just after a month after having been out of the hospital. But I'm sleeping, and it was so violent that it crumpled me in half. So my knees came up and hit my face. I had a broken nose, swelled up cheeks. I could barely see. I remember I was on the floor when I woke up because it threw me out of the bed. But I'm crawling because I thought somebody hit me with a baseball bat.
Yep.
That's how hard this impact was. It turned out to be my knees. Yeah, my knees were bruised. I mean, I was a mess. And so, but I was crawling around the house trying to find whoever was home invading. Not like I could have actually done anything, but my mind was still, that it still wasn't caught up to where my body was at this point. But I thought, somebody's trying to kill my family, and that's how bad this was. So the other ones, I was a little bit better off for the other ones. I mean, it was still the same amount of power. It didn't buckle me to the point where I bashed my face. I did fall out of things. That did happen a few times. I ended up driving one time, and I got shot 5 times while I was driving. One time before that. Yeah, it was just, and it was just miserable. This thing was going off so many times. I'd get often 3 times a day that it would happen. And, they call it electrical storm when you go through something like that. Turns out, like you said, this was actually recalled, probably partly because of what it was doing to me. But the whole time I didn't realize that I can't say the name of the company because of an agreement, but they would send their representative out who was, basically a designer, I don't know, whatever when it comes to the computers and the biomechanics within those types of devices.
Yeah.
But she do her stuff, but she was like doing all these tests on me, and I'm thinking, she's part of the health team, because she was introduced by my doctor, and
Why she's not really caring about your health.
no, yeah, she cared about the company she was representing.
Yeah.
She was a nice lady, but she still had a job to do. I was misled because my doctor introduced me. Probably gets a kickback. You know how doctors have that uncomfortable relationship with pharmaceutical companies, and it's just it's the nature of the beast. But so all the while, but they never told me. Neither one of them told me that this thing was recalled. I ended up finding out it was recalled when I switched care to the Mayo Clinic. They let me know, hey, this thing's bad news. You got to get it out. But yes, I went through all this torture, and they would just, I constantly would be seeing, I'm like, oh my goodness, here she comes again, doing more of these tests. And, I got shocked one time when she was doing the tests. So I really had...
This thing is creating more damage to your heart, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it was creating a lot of damage to my mind, because this is how I kept thinking of it. It's like, this was a time bomb in my own chest that was affecting the other time bomb in my chest. I mean, this thing, and they put it on the side. So what it did is it had a wire that would go up into 2 different areas, so then there would be kind of like a triangulation effect, and then that's what would shock you. It was kind of like the paddles almost. Jeez. Except this was more powerful than the paddles. I mean, this thing, they had it cranked, I don't know, because I was a pretty muscular guy at the time. So they had it set to the highest setting, though. And I mean, they were letting it rip on me, and I think the fact that I was they gave me the going, the prognosis of not having any more heart issues, that this was because they diagnosed initially that it was myocarditis. So they thought it was just some kind of a bug I had, or some virus, that just a rare thing that got my heart and caused this to happen. Turns out that wasn't the case, but they probably didn't know that it was. I mean, clear. I don't think they knew that the doctor. I don't think he was that that kind of sadistic, but he just was green and didn't really understand what was going on. And autoimmune diseases are hard to diagnose. And
yeah, like I got that. I would love to go on this stuff, but I wanted people to have the incentive to read your book, because, like I mentioned, this part of the story is incredible. There was so much that went wrong, and you're dealing with this the whole time. I mean, you're trying to. How long did you have? So you had this incident, and then ultimately you had the incident in 2017. What was the time period between them? How long was that?
It was about like 5 months, roughly.
So 5 months, and it's just complete uncertainty for you. I mean, you're dealing with shocks repeatedly. You're in and out of the hospital, and it doesn't seem like things are going to be getting better, right?
No, in fact, I did a last-ditch effort prior to all that. Went to Cleveland Clinic, and the doctor had promised he was going to do this particular surgery, and I think it's called an ablation, where they go in, they kind of do some different things with it. I don't get too much into all the medical stuff because I'll probably describe it poorly. But I get there, and he didn't want to do it, and he ended up coming up with some excuses that just weren't accurate. He just wasn't being truthful. It was because he was scared when he got in, saw what he was going to have to deal with. A lot of times I think that they want to build their record up, so they take a lot of layups, and taking somebody who's going to alter that score isn't probably advantageous to them. So,
and isn't that the case with so you had your primary doctor, they referred you to the specialist, and everybody, I think what's really happening here is they don't, and you don't know really, no one's really diagnosed what the underlying cause is.
That's right.
So you got these guys that are dealing with the normal range variety of heart issues, plumbing, electric, whatever. Like I had AFib a year ago. I went in for an ablation as a routine thing. I went in for a day and I'm out. But they're looking at your situation, and he's like, I don't know.
He wanted nothing to do with it. Yeah, so at this point, my faith is growing, though, And what it was, I could see how God was taking what I was relying on. I was relying on doctors. I was trusting in them. I was trying to do everything that they had said. I knew that the diet didn't work, for me, but I followed it anyway. They gave me the heart disease diet. Here, eat this Mediterranean diet. This will help you feel better, and made it worse. But the whole protocol doesn't work for somebody who has an autoimmune disease, because I don't have heart disease. I had no markers for it. But that's all they knew. They didn't know what else to do. But I'm listening to what they were doing, and having that trust being, that blind trust in doctors being removed slowly. My eyes were opening up that they don't know what they're talking about. I really started to trust more in God. And I remember after the time I got shocked a bunch of times in the car, it was right before Christmas, and I remember just not having anything else to do, so I was looking at my phone and Googling my condition and putting in all the different symptoms and all the different things that they were telling me, and a differential diagnosis kept popping up, this autoimmune disease called sarcoidosis, and particularly when it affects the heart, it's deadly. It's a really dangerous thing when it gets into your heart. It can affect every system in your body, so every organ system can be affected, from the skin down to you name it can be affected. But this kept popping up, and I'm matching all of the symptoms of this, every single one of them. And then so I started looking at different people who had cardiac sarcoidosis, and I'm like, wow, this is definitely what I'm going through. This is exactly what I'm experiencing. So I told my doctors I wanted to be tested for it. and they're like, we don't really think that's what it is, but it's worth it. It is a differential diagnosis, and it was nice because being a psychotherapist, they took my ability to study research and they took it seriously. So they actually were reading the research that I was providing to them. I was using their own research, things that they had, talked about, and so it really worked nicely because they became more open to it. But finally, I had to put my foot down and say, we're going to do this test now because I got to get this done. And so they scheduled an appointment. They had one of their specialists come in, and he ended up making an appointment to do a biopsy. We did that, and turned out I have sarcoidosis.
Wow.
So, but it was a little too late to, they began treatment right away on pretty high doses of prednisone, which is terrible stuff. But it was like a week or two before I ended up going into this major cardiac event. And so that one was in January of 2017, and I remember it was like midnight or something like that, and I started going into a really high rate of arrhythmia, but it wasn't high enough that my defibrillator was actually shocking me. It was just below the threshold, but I was at this point I was so experienced with that feeling that I knew, okay, I'm about to get shocked. I'm about to get shocked. So it was just this constant waiting, this anticipation for this shock, and it never came. And it probably should have, because the amount of time that I took before I called, to go to the doctor, that I called the ambulance, and they said, yeah. Well, at first we called the medical team, and the medical team said, yeah, call the doctor or the emergency right now. Get him out there. There's something really wrong. So we did. The ambulances in my town, great. They're fantastic. They were always there so quickly. That was the shining light of this whole experience as far as the medical system goes. But they got there. They got me in. I get into the ER, and I had to fight in the ER for 7 hours before they could get me stable enough that they felt they could bring me up to the ICU. And go to the ICU is not a step down in your care. I mean, that's where they send you when you're the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
But they couldn't risk getting me there until they had me stable. Finally, they thought, well, he's not getting better. He's stable as we're going to probably get him. Let's get him up there because he needs that care. So they got me up there, and as soon as they transferred me from the ER bed into the ICU bed, the arrhythmia went super high, and they brought in a crash team. And I don't know how long we were fighting. It was a considerable amount of time considering how bad my heart was at this point. Thankfully, that was the case, because in the ER I was praying. I was confessing every sin I could think of, because I knew from having the doctors say in Cleveland that, hey, focus on quality of life, not quantity. So I knew it was not going to be long, and this one was different. I knew that I wasn't going to make it out of this one. So this whole time in the ER, I was confessing every sin I could think of. My faith was much stronger now. I felt like it's okay. I can die in this one because I'm going to. There's nothing I could do about it. I realized that. But I really struggled with being able to pray, though. Like, really just like pour my heart out to God and just be with Him. There were still fears. There was worries. There was a lot of times people would say, and I was guilty of this myself, is that, I'll make a deathbed confession. I don't have to worry about that. I would not risk that ever again. Because it could have, so many times I saw how it could have been just over. But even with this, I had 7 hours. I could have made the best deathbed confession, and probably did, because I think that I really did do a good job with that. But I had a hard time just really getting that prayer where I felt like He was actually hearing me.
Did you consider, or did a priest come? Did you ever try to get the anointing of the sick or anything like that?
They asked me about that. They knew my religion, so they asked me if I wanted a priest. I did. They tried to get a hold of my parish priest, and they couldn't get a hold of him. The diocese was great. they offered to send somebody out, but this was during the ER time. They weren't really focused on that. So this all happened after I had ended up dying. The diocese was great, but they called me up and said, hey, we can't get a hold of your parish priest, but we can send out someone from the diocese. I said, and this is again after I had died, so I had a totally different experience. I'm like, he'll come when he can. I wasn't really concerned at this point, but I wasn't as concerned.
Yeah.
And I'll get to that. I mean, it'll make so much more sense after I tell what happened. But
Okay.
so, yeah. So, but after having tried to do all this confession and I just wanted to be with God as I was dying. I just wanted to be with Him, just to pray and just to talk with Him, and be ready to hopefully go see Him.
So
And
the question on that, and if this is too personal, that's fine. But how were you praying? Like, were you praying in active contrition? Was it just like going through a mental confession for you? How did that work?
I did the mental confession. I was talking out loud. I definitely did. I said the Jesus prayer. I don't know how many times.
Nice.
Yeah, it's one that I can say no matter how stressful things get. It's just an easy, beautiful prayer. But I was making active contrition. But what I really wanted was I just wanted to sit back and think about Him on the cross. I wanted to think about Him in His agony. I wanted to think about Him in His birth. I just wanted to be with Him, and I couldn't. When you pray the Rosary, you're thinking about Jesus' life, and it's beautiful. And when I had that experience when I first started praying the Rosary, it was so easy. The consolations that He was giving me was just like when you're a little kid, you get the greatest tasting ice cream. It's just so sweet and beautiful, but that's what it was. It was so easy for me to meditate on His life, and that's why I fell in love with the Rosary, and I just wanted to have that as I was dying. What was great though is that when they bring a crash team in, it's chaotic. The only way I can really describe it is like the Wizard of Oz, when they have those flying monkeys come in, they're ripping apart that scarecrow. I mean, that's what they were doing. They're pulling my arms and legs in different directions. They have people doing all kinds of different things. And then the only place that they don't have somebody is at the bottom of your feet. There's nothing going on down there, particularly when it's a heart issue. So they just don't need to be down there. But I happened to choose this particular hospital that still had a crucifix, not a cross, but a crucifix on the wall. And it just happened to be at the bottom of my feet.
Oh, wow.
And I was strapped down, so I couldn't move. And you got everybody surrounding you doing all their different tasks. And I could see this crucifix. That's the only thing. I couldn't even take my eyes off if I wanted to, but here I'm looking at it. And I just remember saying to the Blessed Mother that I want her to help me to pray. And as soon as I asked her for help, and this has been a theme throughout my whole experience, but even before that, once I converted to Catholicism, I would ask her different things, and she always would point me towards Jesus. Never failed, ever. So I asked her to help me to pray, and I just had that beautiful conversation with Jesus. The fear went away.
Wow.
It was still present, how you can be afraid. Like, I knew I had no control. I couldn't predict what was going to happen, although I knew I was going to die. I didn't know what was going to happen in that meantime. But I didn't even care. I was like, I know He was holding me. Like, He was right there with me. And He had been the whole time. It's just I wasn't able to get out of my own head in that. And just that simple asking for her help, immediately, it was just as if everything just went away, and I was just ready to experience that He was holding me this whole time.
Wow.
So I didn't want to talk anymore at this point. I told the doctors that there was a nurse. The doctors were telling the nurses what to do, but there was one nurse who kept asking me questions. She was trying to keep me awake, trying to keep me alive and talking to her and with her. I just told her, I said, I don't want to talk anymore. I had closed my eyes, and she's like, we need you to open your eyes. We need you to open your eyes. I couldn't get it all out. I really wanted to say, I don't want to see what's going on out there, because it was terrible. But I just wanted to be with Jesus and then die. That's at this point I was like, just take me out of this. I'm ready to go. There's nothing else here that I want, and I just remember the shake and this pop, and I ejected from my body, and it was intense. I don't know if I can say that it was so painful, although because it was so quick, it did feel like my memory at that time feels like it was painful, but there was so much pain going on. I mean, they were shocking me. They were doing all kinds of stuff up until that. But immediately as I left my body, I felt no pain. I only felt like this just comfort and ease and contentment throughout my whole spirit. And all the chaos, all the noise instantly stopped.
This concludes part 1 of this interview series with Brian Hoyland. If you'd like to learn more about Brian's story, I cannot recommend his book highly enough. It's entitled From Sudden Death to Paradise, the story of a near-death experience, and it's available on Amazon.com in a print and digital format. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. If you have a question you'd like to ask Brian in the third segment of this series, please leave it in the comments, and I'll try to work some of them into the final part of the interview. Finally, if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like and share it with others. This story is too amazing to keep to yourself. Thanks very much for watching, and as always, siempre adelante.